All right, welcome everyone. Back with my great friend Dan Jimenez for our third official, I don't know, somewhere in there.
We've done so few, I've lost count already.
Yeah, yeah. But we kind of been in this arc of talking about the law of attraction. What is it? What does it mean? What is it not? How does it work? How do we maximize our use of it to create more of the things that we want in life? How do we pay attention to the synchronicities that the universe shows us that we're on the right path to creating our dreams, reaching our goals, getting our manifestations. And I had some interesting experiences the last few weeks that I thought would be pertinent, kind of a different look at this. And more so on the flip side of things, like when does the law of attraction or manifestation go wrong? Or, what do you do when it's seemingly life is working against you, the world's working against you and throwing you curveballs, and it's challenging, it's tough. And so figured we could look at those and hopefully pull some value out of each of these experiences for the listeners, and kind of what do you do? How do you handle adversity and the curveballs that life throws you? So, yeah, so the last couple of weeks, really it was within a week span, and it started off with one evening. We were having torrential downpours here in Colorado, and had just a nudge, like a little voice in my head, like, you should maybe go look in the basement. And I was about to go to bed. It was at 10:30 at night. Went down there, took my first step on the basement floor, just splash. Then all of a sudden, oh no, why? And spent the next, 2 hours trying to figure out what the heck happened. And at that point, it was late, couldn't really do much about it, but discovered the sump pump was overflowing, or it wasn't working properly. So it caused essentially our entire basement to flood. So that was quite the adventure, waking up at 5 a.m. the next day, paling 5-gallon buckets of water into my shower drain until my wife's father came with some equipment to another pump, and that made life a whole lot easier. But yeah, it was pretty intense, pretty challenging, in the moment, kind of like, woe is me, and just not a fun experience, and then let's see, it was a few days after that, and I don't think I shared this with you yet, Dan, but it was so I had a hockey game the following Wednesday, and had a encounter, I'll call it, with someone on the other team, where we're kind of going after the puck, and I kind of rubbed him against the boards, and then he grabbed my arm and pulled me down, and my knee went inward and my foot stayed outward, and he like came down on it with all of his weight and just felt this like excruciating pain. I didn't hear anything pop, luckily. So that was interesting too, because that was pretty painful and kind of limited, the things that I could do, as far as, I mean, I had a whole basement to kind of fix up, and I wanted to play golf that weekend, and just, again, not a fun experience. And then 2 days after that, we discovered that it was time to put our sweet puppy Nala down, which she was old, and we kind of saw it coming. It was essentially a year from when we discovered she had a tumor in her lung, and we didn't know how bad it was, and she just was kind of going downhill. So that was my fun week of stuff. And so coming out of that, and processing, what does all this mean, again, tying it to the previous conversations, like, did I attract this? Why would this happen? What is in it for me? And so wanted to get your thoughts first, or ask you, do you believe there's some level of attraction for those sorts of things that happen in our lives?
Yeah, I mean, at its essence, I used to not believe it. I used to believe there was things outside of it, and
Uh,
I was like, yeah, but you can't attract everything to you. I don't know. The more I go on, the more I, read about this stuff and see it play out in my life and hear it explained in different ways. I am a more and more each day a big believer in yes, everything that happens to you, you attract, or at least are in agreement to on some level.
yeah,
So, for instance, um, the war that's going on in the Ukraine, right? Like, I'm in agreement to that. I don't condone it, but I'm aware of it. And because I'm aware of it, my consciousness is helping to create that situation. I know that's kind of like a, a meta
yeah,
idea.
extreme
But
example. Yeah,
we don't have to get like too deep down that rabbit hole. But yeah, I mean, I believe more like collective consciousness, right? Like, did Brian create like the rainstorm situations to flood Denver and have your basement flood? Like, in part, I think there's a collective consciousness that maybe brought that. Um, I know there's a lot of wildfires and stuff going on, so rain, especially in Denver, is a good thing. So, like, if
yeah,
we were to look at, you know, the situation as a at large, you know, not a bad manifestation. In terms of bringing the flooded basement into your life, yeah, I do believe you had a hand in that. Um, and Amy as well, because that's part of her experience.
mhm.
And yeah, so
Yeah. And I still struggle with this one because I do lean more on that side of things where, we're always co-creating with the universe. So you have to think that, if my thoughts, my consciousness is connected to the collective consciousness, is connected to the universe as a whole, then yes, my thoughts and my feelings have some effect or, co-creation with the system as a whole. And it's, with things like this, and especially with clients, I'm really careful because, you know, when it's a really traumatic thing, or like when you're talking about death, and, you have to be careful about that. But if it's in their model of the world, they might really resonate it and really get it and derive a lot of power from that. So, like, on one hand, it can be, again, I don't know the word, detrimental or not empowering for some to think about it that way. And on the other hand, it can be empowering because if I were to just look at it and say, oh, it's just random, I had nothing to do with anything, it's just SOL, just bad cards pulled of the deck, right? Like, just bad luck, and I have to deal with the shit now. On the other hand, I can look at it and say, oh, actually, all this junk that was sitting in my basement for years that needed to be cleaned out. And the really interesting thing was that Amy and I had been daydreaming about remodeling the basement since, like, basically when we moved in 4 years ago, and just didn't do anything with it. I mean, we did other projects around the house, but wasn't that important to us. And so I can't help but think, like, oh, maybe the universe is responding to something I put in motion, right? Like the vortex of manifestation, that I'm not happy with my basement. I want to change it. And maybe I need a little help from my insurance company to make that happen.
sure.
So, there was definitely positives that came out of it. And actually, when I look at it, it's going to be better than had nothing happened, right? Like, I'm going to come out better than I was because of this gift from the universe that my insurance agent was like, hey, I'm going to create the estimate for you. I'm going to submit it and we're just going to send you the money right away. I'm like, oh, thanks. Like, didn't even ask for it, but like, it was just like, wow, that's really cool. So, and then you and I talked about some of the symbolism around floods, which I always find interesting when you look at the what else is this connected to, flooding being a washing away of old or a renewal. You said it really well. How would you describe flooding and the symbolism behind that?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of how I've seen it. I've seen it in either mythology, story, parables,
Yeah,
history, that type of stuff. Yeah, it's a washing away of old, right?
yeah,
I've heard it explained as like anytime you have a flood, and you could say a metaphorical flood as opposed to a literal flood, right? Like it's washing away an old paradigm. It's washing away what no longer needs to be there and what's ready to be discarded. And unfortunately, I'll say unfortunately in this circumstances, because most people feel this way, it's not very peaceful a lot of times.
right.
It's pretty violent, it's pretty quick, it's pretty out of nowhere. It's we'll use the term devastating to a lot of people, right?
Hmm.
But it is a washing away of an old paradigm. And usually what's left over is truth. What's left over is, what needs to stay, right? Like in this case for you, the structure of your house is still standing, which is awesome. A lot of people are way less fortunate in those arenas. And I also know a lot of people like uh, I've been adjacent to two big, I guess three big weather events. One was Hurricane Katrina. I was down in Alabama for a military school, and we were basically everyone south of us was directly impacted, but we set up like refuge shelters at the base we were on, and we're housing a lot of people that were coming up. And while we were there on the weekends, we'd go down and help with restoration and we'd go in houses and be ripping sheetrock off and spraying the foundations with bleach, the studs and stuff with bleach to kill any of the mold.
Hmm.
And then the other was Hurricane Sandy. So a lot of my family lives on the East Coast, New York, New Jersey.
Yeah,
Some super directly affected, some mysteriously the storm did not hit that one block where my family's house was.
yeah,
Uh, and then the third one was actually in Colorado when we had those huge floods, maybe like 10 years ago. And like Estes Park flooded and
yeah,
Long Hole, like is pretty, damaging. However, when you hear the people's stories coming out of there, right? Typically on the media, it's a lot of negative stories. It's a lot of, oh my God, it's devastation. They lost everything. It's,
here's
the
how
world
many people died. Like,
totally, right? Um, but on the other hand, I've heard so many amazing stories of what came out of it, right? People getting completely new houses. Yeah, maybe it took 2 years. Maybe it was pretty, terrible in that time. Um, just stories of families getting to come together because of the situation, communities coming together because of the situation. So I'm not necessarily, sitting here and advocating that everyone's experience should be positive in this and that people aren't affected. However, and I know it's something you want to talk about today, it's like the meaning that you put on what's happening in the situation you're in has a profoundly impactful um, outcome on your experience
yeah,
and not just your experience, but like the physical manifestations that happen in your life. So these floods, these washing away of the old paradigm, if you're viewing it from that standpoint, it gives you this amazing foundation, clearing away the old to build the new,
yeah,
right? All of your
yeah,
old life, all of your old self, all of your old shit you've accumulated, right? Hey, here's a chance to practice non-attachment and move forward to create the next version of yourself or the new
yeah,
life you've always wanted.
yeah. Agreed. And that's really the bottom line for me. Again, like we could theorize and philosophize about, oh, did I actually attract this or not? I mean, really, we don't know. But what I choose to believe and what it comes down to is, yeah, this can be a terrible shit experience for me. And I can just be pissed off and oh, this is the worst. Or I can say, you know what? Here's the actual half full. I'm not ignoring the half empty because it sucked. That day was terrible. Like it was 16 hours of shit, but kind of a small price to pay for all of the cool things that are coming out of it, where cleaning out the old, get to remodel the basement a bit, fix the sump pump, which shame on me. That's a lesson. I should have replaced it when we first bought the house because that's what the inspection guy told us. So, oops. so, um, yeah, the meaning that you place on it. Again, we said that, and I think the first video around that's really what the law of attraction is, because if nothing, that I just improve my experience of it, and it's not about the actual like data of it, not better or worse, but here's what I'm choosing to look at and create for myself through this experience. That's creating reality.
Yeah, the event is a data point, like you mentioned, and sometimes you can see the direct way that you created that data point, right? Like
Yeah.
someone cuts you off and you decide to like tailgate them and you get into an accident. It's like,
Right.
see how I directly created that instance in my
Right.
life. Um, but if you can't see kind of the events that led up to that or how you attracted that experience into your life, you can still choose to look at that data point and say, okay, this is what happened. Now, what am I choosing? What kind of meaning am I choosing?
Right.
Maybe it's like, hey, in that road rage scenario, let's ease up on trying to uh, ease up on like feeling pissed off that someone cut me off in traffic, right? Like
Right. Right.
some other things to work on. Maybe I don't have my emotions under control as much as I need to.
Yeah.
Uh,
And what's funny about it is I've used that example of Hurricane Katrina countless times of like, it's not about the storm. It's not the storm that creates reality. It's the aftermath. And I say, yeah, some people were ruined. Some people were devastated. Some people lost their lives. Some people a little bit, they survived. They're a little bit better off, maybe a little worse off. And then some people looked at it as a fresh start. They got to move. They got an insurance check. I use that example. And I'm like, oh, that just happened to me. So yeah, pretty cool. Um, but yeah, for things like passing of loved ones, and I know you just lost your grandfather, and we've talked about this a bit, but our dog, and my wife is pretty upset about it. I was, super upset, still am at times. And, again, the silver lining of things is like, what's interesting, again, the co-creative process around it was like, because we kind of knew it was coming, but we didn't know how long. So we started daydreaming about, what does life look like when she's gone? And, are we going to travel more? Are we going to, maybe even just like take a year and rent our house out since we don't have to be here? And like, what could it look like? Or what are some of the things we can be excited about or joyful about versus this is just all terrible, we're going to miss her so much and we're just distraught all the time. So again, another way, I mean, it's both, right? Like I am having my moments of grief and sadness and I miss her dearly, and there's a future, there's things that have opened up. It's like the law of something needs to be demolished essentially in order to build new. You need to kill a tree to build a house. So it's all this kind of yin yang, half full, half empty, and you get to choose. So
yeah.
I don't, if you had any insights around, that as it related to your grandfather, because I think that's kind of the toughest one for most, is when we lose someone or something we care so much about.
No, absolutely. The first thing, obviously, you go through the immediate emotional reaction of what happened, right? Like, or your interpretation of what happened. My grandfather passed away. There's sadness, there's tears, there's like, uh, depending on how you've been training your brain over the years, you could either go into the immediate, like, thought of everything you're losing by him not being in your life, right? I'm not going to have this now. I'm not going to have that. Now I don't have, you know,
Right.
I'm missing. It's all about me. You make it very ego focused.
I don't
You know,
get to snuggle with my dog. I don't get to take her on walks. Yeah.
right? It's like, oh, poor you, you know. Um, and we need to go through that period, right? Like that's not something to be like, suck it up, like
Yeah.
this isn't about you, it's about them, you
Yeah.
know. But
We're human. We're not robots that can just not be sad.
it's just an awareness piece, right? So like understand you'll go through those emotions. It's totally fine to have those emotions. It's not only is it normal, it's healthy to express those emotions.
For sure.
Like the whole concept of spiritual bypassing when like something like that happens and you're immediately like, nope, everything's good, it happened for a reason, life is great. It's like maybe at some point in your life you'll get to a moment where you can instantly go into that. But as I've seen spiritual masters navigate this type of stuff, it never really looks like that,
Yeah.
because even in the moment there's compassion, there's love, there's celebration, there's like, like my grandfather meant the world to me, and I'm so thankful for the time that I got with him, and I'm so thankful that all the knowledge and experience he was able to provide me, and the fact that he lived till almost 98 years old,
Yeah.
like 2 months, like
Long, great life.
long great life. And he was pretty damn mobile up until about 6 months ago, and so it's like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say like I'm not sad about it because of all these great things, but when I start putting my focus on all the great things that happened and all the great time we got to spend together, and how my kids, his great grandkids, got to meet him multiple times and hang out with him, and I have tons of pictures from when my kids are like really little with him, and it was amazing. And
Yeah.
then to fly out to New Jersey, I took my oldest, Everest, who's 8 years old, with me and experience this like really powerful event where the male lineage, now I'm the oldest of that male lineage because my grandfather died, my father died a long time ago. Um, I'm next in line, and then I have my son, and like we got to go honor the masculine, right? Honor the paternal line of
Yeah.
um, yeah, my family lineage, and he got to experience this really powerful event, be part of it. He was a pallbearer, got to hold my grandfather's casket, and like it was such an amazing bonding experience for us, and us being able to be there to comfort my mother and my grandmother who's still alive, and reunite with all my friends and family that I haven't seen in a
Yeah.
long time. Like we just told stories about him. And actually we told stories about my late father that, he died when I was 11, and all of my older cousins who, they were like 10 to 20 years older than me, were all there telling me stories about my dad and what a great person he was. And it was
Right.
like this whole experience went from, oh, this, like, oh, I can't believe this is out of my life, to what a celebration that I got to experience and I got to share with my family. And it doesn't mean that there's not going to be hard times, and it doesn't mean like my grandmother's not suffering or struggling from this, but anytime you focus on all of the good and all the appreciation from the situation, it just leads to things and events like storytelling of loved ones and
Yeah.
memories and laughter and smiling, and that person in that moment becomes more alive than he was 6 months ago when I didn't think about him every day.
Right. Yeah.
Like we weren't like, oh, what's grandpa doing today? It's like in this moment, he's so fully alive, even though he's physically dead, uh, in spirit and mind, and like the aliveness was just palpable.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer that that act of thinking about and talking about, and it does keep them alive. Like it's like thought form, right? Like the idea of the conversations around the collective consciousness of your family keeps them alive through just having good memories and thinking great thoughts about them.
Absolutely.
Or it could be the flip side, but we won't go there. Sounds like your grandfather was an amazing man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And with Nala, my dog, the one thing that keeps me feeling good about it, because we were having a tough time, like, is it time? Do we do this? I don't know. But she was not doing good. So to take the pain and suffering out makes me feel so much more better. And that's like a true act of compassion and love for them. So now the knee, I'm at a loss at this point with what that's all about. What's interesting, because I had a knee issue a couple of years ago. It's the opposite knee, and where I had to basically be off of my feet for, yeah, you got your
I I know I was looking for that book.
typically it's right, like due to like mobility, right? It's a joint. So flexibility, being flexible. I mean, it could be related to the flood, because one of the most challenging things was like I couldn't do anything about it, right? Like especially with water, it just keeps coming, and you can't like I have to deal with this. I have no other choice. And so, perhaps it could be related to that, or the being flexible with life circumstances.
Yeah, it's funny. There's so many ways that you can approach this, right?
Yeah.
A very practical standpoint of like, oh, I need to be a more aware hockey player, and I need to,
Right.
muscles better so that I even when I do fall, I can, keep myself together. Which, I mean, it sounds like even despite what happened, you had enough strength around that joint to hold it in place to where it didn't tear or
Thank God for yoga. I credit yoga for that.
um, from the metaphysical level of like, that book Heal Your Body. There's like the right side is masculine, the left side is feminine, right? So is it
Hmm.
right knee or left knee?
It's my left knee.
Your left knee, all right, that's like your feminine allowing side. It could be, it, we could sit here and surmise that like, oh, it's a uh, more indication that you need to let go and let God, more indication that you need to
Sure.
allow and surrender.
Yeah.
And despite your best efforts and despite all you can do, like you're gonna have to bend the knee and surrender.
Yeah. Sit down, shut up. Just we'll take care of this. Oh, here's an insurance check, by the way.
Yeah. But then also like somewhere in between those two, I I find is a very practical way to approach things. Again, this is just all choosing meaning, right? Like
Sure.
you
Yeah.
don't have to believe it, you can believe it. Like your reality is your perception of what's happening. So if you believe it, then it's true. If you don't believe it, then it's not true for you.
Right.
But that's somewhere in between. It could be even something as subconscious sabotage, like self-sabotage, where you're like, hey, I was supposed to be running a marathon in 3 weeks and now I have an excuse not to. Or,
Right.
it's like, I know I was supposed to do this big yard project, but I was really scared of it and I really didn't want to have to deal with it. And so here's a great excuse to, you know, sit down and not have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it can be any and all of those. It's always interesting, and for everyone listening, like this, Dan and I like to geek out on this. We look for meaning in everything, and you could say sometimes, oh, that's a reach, but I love looking at the body as indication or physical manifestations of what's going on in our psyche, even if it is someone yanking me down and it was an external person, but like it's all connected. I mean, it's all connected. And I think you can find a lot of value in looking at what your body's telling you, even if it is an injury, to point to maybe you need to pay attention to this aspect of your life or this thought pattern that might be occurring. And Louise L. Hay is the book that we're referencing, where she essentially has a whole list of ailments and how it connects to your thought and emotional patterns. So it's always fascinating. I always enjoy it. And if anyone wants to volunteer or say, hey, what about this? Feel free to comment. We love looking at this stuff. So
Yeah. And, ultimately, like to the point I was trying to make is the meaning you put on something has so much more power than what maybe the actual meaning for it is, right?
yeah,
Like, so you can, if you're using it in an empowering way, then by all means, believe it, act on it, and see how your life turns out.
absolutely. Love it. So yeah, and just to summarize, I guess the main takeaways here is, again, when things aren't going your way, or it feels like you're being met with challenges and obstacles, and how do you deal with the shit that life presents you? Reframing, looking at both sides of the glass, it's always there. And to Dan's point just now, you get to choose the meaning, and that's the act of creating a reality. That's, law of attraction at its finest. And so if you want more joy, happiness, ease in your life versus the frustration or the anger, some of the half empty things that come with life challenges, those are some really useful tools to use. So hope that's of great value. Yeah, any final thoughts from you, Dan? Any
No,
last?
I always enjoy these conversations, and this seemed to be a really practical application for, all the work we do.
Yeah, agreed. Look forward to more analyzing more experiences, and um, again, continue giving value through our shared experiences here. So thank you. We'll talk again soon, and thanks everyone for listening.